You need to let her go. That's what her brother told me while they all acted like nothing happened. My wife ghosted me without a word, and while her family was busy posting vacation photos, I was barely holding it together. Then I found that old silver box in the back of her closet, and as it fell open in my hands, I just sat there whispering, no way. Does this mean she never? Hey Reddit, I'm 41M, and this is going to be a long one, but I promise it's worth the read. It's about family, betrayal, and a truth I never saw coming. I still don't know how to process it all, but I need to get it off my chest. My wife, Lyra, 35F, vanished from my life without a word, and the way her family handled it made everything worse. Turned out, they had their own story to tell. I want to tell you everything from the beginning, so bear with me. Lyra and I met at a tech conference about 8 years ago. She was the quiet one in the corner with her laptop, always typing away. I was there with my company's procurement team, and somehow, a conversation sparked. I admired her focus and intelligence. She was the kind of person who didn't waste words, but when she spoke, you listened. We started dating 6 months later. Things moved fast after that. She had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. Not clingy, just present. We got married 3 years after we met. But from early on, I noticed something about her family, the Aldridges, that set off alarms in my head. Her parents, Celeste and Garrett, were the kind of people who held grudges like trophies. They had this carefully curated image of perfection, high society dinners, charity events, endless smiles for the cameras. But behind closed doors, it was all calculation and control. Callan, Lyra's older brother, was the golden child. To them, he could do no wrong. He had his way with everyone in the family, bending situations to his advantage. I'll be honest, I never liked him. He seemed to have a way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice. Lyra tried to shield me from all that, but over time, the cracks started showing. She'd come home from family dinners drained, sometimes silent for hours. I remember one night she sat on the couch, staring at her phone, and said quietly, "They don't want me to have anything that Callan doesn't." I thought it was just sibling rivalry, but it was more than that. Fast forward to last year. Things between Lyra and me weren't perfect, but we were working through some issues. Then one morning she said she needed space, and I figured she was overwhelmed with work or family stress. I didn't push. Days passed. Then a week. She stopped answering my calls and texts. No note, no explanation. I went to her parents' house to check on her. The place was bustling with activity, lights on, cars parked out front. I knocked and rang the bell multiple times. No one answered. Eventually, I called Callan. He picked up, voice smooth but distant. "Look, you need to back off. Lyra's taking time for herself. We're handling things." "Handling what?" I asked, desperation creeping in. Callan's tone sharpened. "You don't get to control her. She's not your project." It felt like a slap. Days later, her family's social media accounts started posting pictures, family vacations, dinners, events, all with Lyra smiling, happy, as if nothing was wrong. Not a single word to me. I messaged her mom, Celeste, pleading for answers. She replied coldly, "She's fine. Please respect our family's privacy." I was alone, left to unravel this silence. Then came the call from Callan. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "You need to let her go. She's making choices for her own good, and you're only making it worse." I told him, "She's my wife. She owes me the truth." He laughed softly. "That's not how this works anymore." The call ended abruptly. That's when I found the box. It was tucked away in the back of her closet, an old, tarnished silver box. Not locked, just hidden. Inside, I found photographs, letters, and documents I never expected. There was a photo of Lyra as a teenager, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, eyes wide and fearful. The letters were between her and someone named Imogen, dated years before we met. One letter spoke of a secret, something Lyra had buried deep, something her family had desperately tried to hide. As I read, the pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just about her needing space or mental health. This was about a past that her family had worked hard to erase, and now it was catching up. I sat on the edge of the bed long after the sun had gone down, the silver box open on my lap, the letters spread out before me like some fragile map leading to a secret buried deep beneath years of smiles and polite family photos. It felt surreal, like I was holding pieces of a life I never really knew. The photos showed a younger Lyra, maybe 15 or 16. She was standing in a group, but none of those faces looked familiar. The eyes in those pictures weren't the same calm, reserved ones I knew. They were raw, vulnerable, terrified, even. And the letters. The letters were written in a shaky hand, but the pain behind each word was unmistakable. The first one I unfolded was from someone named Imogen, dated nearly 10 years ago. It began cautiously, almost like a whisper. Lyra, I don't know how to say this out loud, but you're not alone in what happened that summer. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. What summer? What was she carrying? There were replies, Lyra's handwriting. Short, hesitant, full of questions and doubt. It was clear she was reaching out for help, for someone to understand. The letters didn't mention her family directly, but there was a pattern of secrecy, fear, and an overwhelming need to escape. As I read through, I found myself sinking deeper into a world Lyra had never shared with me, and suddenly, her sudden disappearance felt less like a whim and more like a desperate flight from something she couldn't face. The next morning, I forced myself to call her parents. If there was any chance they could explain what was happening, it was them. Celeste answered after a couple of rings. Her voice was crisp, colder than I remembered, like a door closing in my face. I'm calling to talk about Lyra. I found some things in her closet, letters, photos. Please, I need to understand what's going on. There was a pause, and then she said, those things are old wounds that should have been left in the past. It's not your place to dig. I'm her husband. I think I deserve to know what's going on. Celeste's voice hardened. She's made her choice. You need to respect that. Choice? You mean disappearing without a word? You're hiding something. Don't make this harder than it already is, she said before hanging up. I stared at my phone in disbelief. That was it. No explanation, no concern, just a cold dismissal. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I still needed to understand the family's part in this. So I called Callan again, this time more carefully. He answered on the second ring. I told you, you should let her go. I found the box, the letters, the photos. What did you all do to her? There was a long silence. Then a sigh. You really want to dig into this? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. He started talking, but his words were like ice. Lyra's childhood was complicated. You think those perfect Aldridges are what they seem? You have no idea. He went on to describe a family obsessed with appearances, controlling every detail of their lives to protect a reputation. He admitted there were incidents that were best forgotten, things Lyra had tried to expose, but every time she tried, her family shut her down, isolated her, made her feel like the problem. The letters? That summer? It was when she tried to stand up for herself, tried to tell them what happened. They silenced her, told her it was her fault. You understand what that does to a person, right? I could barely breathe. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I whispered. Because it wasn't your story. And because no one here wants to dredge up the past, Callan said flatly. But why ghost me? Why pretend she's fine on social media while I'm left in the dark? That's the Aldridge way, he said bitterly. Control the narrative. If you don't fit, you don't exist. The more I learned, the more furious and helpless I felt. But I was also determined. Lyra wasn't just hiding from me. She was running from her family's suffocating grip. I started piecing together her life before me, from the letters, the photos, and whispered truths from a few distant friends she had kept secret. She had been a bright, hopeful teenager until that summer, until something broke her. The Aldridges had crushed her spirit, forcing her into silence, making her disappear long before she left me. In the following days, I tried to reach out to Lyra's closest friends, hoping for some insight, some way to get through to her. Most ignored me or blocked me. One finally answered. Her name was Marissa. She spoke quietly, like she was afraid even talking about it would bring trouble. Lyra's been through hell, she said. Her family, they're not what you think. They control everything. If you try to help her, you'll just make it worse. I pressed her for details. Marissa told me about the family's relentless pressure on Lyra to conform, to keep their secrets buried. About times they threatened to cut her off financially, socially, even legally if she dared to speak out. It's why she disappeared, Marissa said softly. She needed to get away, to breathe. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about a wife leaving her husband. This was a woman trying to survive a family that saw her as a problem to erase. I was stuck between two worlds, the life I thought I shared with Lyra and the dark reality she had lived through long before I came along. Her family wasn't just distant. They were actively working against her. And now, with the silver box and those letters in my hands, I knew I had a choice. I could walk away, pretend none of this existed, keep living my quiet, broken life. Or I could fight for her, expose the Aldridges for what they really were. but I had no idea what that fight would cost me. The night I decided I needed answers, I returned to the closet. That's when I found something else. Hidden beneath the letters, wrapped carefully in a faded cloth, was an old journal. Its pages were brittle, edges curled from time. And on the first page, in Lyra's handwriting, was a simple note. If anyone ever finds this, know that I tried to fight. But some battles are bigger than us. I sat there, heart pounding, torn between fear and determination. I knew that whatever was in that journal could change everything. But I also knew that opening it would mean stepping into a war with a family that had spent years building walls of silence and control. I couldn't sleep that night. The journal was staring at me from the bedside table, its worn leather cover whispering secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. But the truth had a way of clawing its way out of darkness, whether you were ready or not. Morning came sluggishly, gray and heavy with rain, matching the mood settling in my chest. I finally reached for the journal and cracked it open to the first page. Lyra's handwriting was small, careful, almost hesitant. The pages told a story, one I had never been allowed to see, one her family fought hard to bury. She wrote about her teenage years, the relentless pressure to be perfect, to never question the family's reputation, no matter the cost. There were passages about late-night arguments she wasn't allowed to have, dreams she was told to abandon, and a terrible summer when everything shattered. That summer was the year she tried to stand up to her family for the first time. There was mention of a secret she found out, something about Callan, her brother, that shook her world. She spoke of threats, isolation, and a silence that wasn't accidental but forced. Reading it was like peeling back layers of carefully painted lies. I realized then that this wasn't just about Lyra leaving me or needing space. It was about escaping a cage made of control, fear, and cruelty. Her family was more than just cold and dismissive. They were dangerous. They'd spent years manipulating her, gaslighting her, and burying her truth under a facade of smiles and social media posts. I knew I couldn't just stand by. I had to fight back. For her. For the truth. But where do you start when you're up against a family like the Aldridges? I began quietly. No dramatic confrontations, no accusations. I started by collecting every scrap of information I could. I dug through old emails, texts, social media posts, anything that could hint at what really went on behind those perfect family dinners. I reached out to the few people I could trust, Lyra's old friends, a former neighbor, even a distant cousin who had once tried to speak up but was quickly silenced. Their stories painted a picture I could barely believe. They told me about how Celeste and Garrett would control every aspect of their children's lives, how they'd isolate Lyra from anyone who might support her, and how Callan was allowed to get away with things no one else could. One former family friend confided in me that Callan was involved in some shady business dealings that the Aldridges had worked to cover up, threatening anyone who came close to the truth. The more I learned, the clearer it became. The Aldridges weren't just toxic. They were actively destroying anyone who challenged their perfect image. But it wasn't just about exposing them. I wanted Lyra's voice back. I wanted her to have control over her own story. So I started reaching out to journalists who had covered stories about powerful families, social workers who had worked with victims of family abuse, and even legal experts. The plan wasn't just revenge for me, it was to create a spotlight so bright that the Aldridges couldn't hide anymore. Meanwhile, every attempt I made to contact Lyra's family was met with cold silence or veiled threats. Celeste's messages were curt and condescending. You're stirring up things best left buried. Callan's tone became sharper over time. Back off, or you'll regret it. They tried to intimidate me, tried to make me doubt myself. But I was beyond fear. One evening, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a thick envelope filled with photocopied documents, court records, medical reports, even a few personal letters. They were attempts to discredit Lyra, to paint her as unstable, untrustworthy. Attempts to isolate her further. But to me, it was proof. Proof of how far they'd go to control her narrative, to protect themselves. With everything in hand, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in family law and abuse cases. She listened carefully as I laid out the story, the letters, the journal, the threats. Her eyes darkened when I mentioned the Aldridges' attempts to silence me. We've got a serious case here, she said. This isn't just about custody or divorce. This is about emotional abuse, coercion, and possibly criminal behavior. She advised me to prepare for a battle, but said there was a way to turn their tactics against them. I started documenting everything. Phone calls, messages, every interaction with the family and anyone connected to them. I set up a secure folder on my computer to keep track of evidence. The more I documented, the more the picture of their cruelty became undeniable. One night, as I was compiling everything, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging. Leave the past alone. This isn't over." No signature. No name. Just a thinly veiled threat. I stared at it, anger boiling under the surface. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. They were scared. I knew I was stepping into dangerous territory. But I also knew I had something they could never take away, the truth. The next step was to reach out to Lyra directly. I found an old email address of hers, one she rarely used but still active. I sent a simple message. "I found the journal. I know what they did. I'm fighting for you. When you're ready, I'm here." No reply. Days passed. Then, on a gray afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman standing there, young, nervous, eyes darting. She introduced herself as Imogen. She said she was a friend of Lyra's from years ago, someone who had tried to help her escape. Imogen handed me a small envelope. Inside was a letter from Lyra. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. She wrote about the fear she felt, the love she still had for me, and a plea for patience. She said she couldn't come back yet, but that she wanted me to keep fighting. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming a life stolen by lies and silence. The days after Imogen's visit were a strange mixture of hope and tension. For the first time in months, I felt a tangible connection to Lyra, even if it was just through that fragile letter she entrusted to Imogen, a thread of hope woven through her shaky handwriting. It wasn't much, just a few carefully chosen words promising she wasn't gone forever, that she wanted me to keep fighting, to believe in her. But those words meant everything. They were a lifeline, a fragile beacon in the darkness. At the same time, the letter reminded me just how fragile Lyra still was. The damage she'd carried for so long wasn't something you could just shake off overnight. Reading her thoughts, her fears, the way she described years of being silenced and controlled, it broke my heart all over again. She was trying to heal, but the scars were deep, and her courage to even reach out this way was a testament to how much she had endured. With that renewed purpose, I threw myself into building our case. There was no room for error, no margin for doubt. With the lawyer's guidance, I meticulously gathered everything we had, the worn journal filled with Lyra's hidden truths, the stack of letters exchanged with Imogen and others who knew the dark side of the Aldrich family, the faded photographs capturing a terrified young girl, and testimonies from friends who had witnessed the family's toxic hold on her life. Marissa and Imogen's accounts were invaluable. They spoke of years of manipulation, emotional abuse, and a family willing to destroy anyone who threatened their pristine reputation. Every bit of evidence added weight to our story, a mountain of proof that revealed the Aldriches not as the polished, picture-perfect family they portrayed on social media, but as a cold, calculated machine built on control and cruelty. The day we finally filed the lawsuit was unceremonious. No flashing cameras, no dramatic statements to the press. Just the quiet, resolute determination of someone who had spent years in the shadows, finally standing up and demanding justice. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread, relief that the fight was no longer just mine to bear alone, dread for the battle I knew was about to begin. And the war came quickly. The Aldriches responded with the kind of cold, calculated cruelty I'd come to expect from a family so skilled at hiding their darkness behind flawless appearances. Celeste, with all the grace of a viper, launched a media smear campaign. Carefully crafted statements leaked to local news painted Lyra as unstable, mentally unwell, a woman driven by delusion. Meanwhile, they cast me as the desperate husband, grasping for sympathy, trying to drag a private family matter into the public eye for personal gain. The narrative was deliberate and vicious, designed to isolate us, to turn public opinion against Lyra and me. Callan, ever the manipulator, flexed his connections like a weapon. He made veiled threats to anyone who might testify against the family, hinting at legal battles, financial ruin, and worse. Witnesses began receiving calls, texts, and subtle warnings, intimidation tactics meant to shut them up before they could speak. Garrett, the patriarch, played his part quietly but effectively. He hired private investigators to dig into my background, searching for anything to discredit me, anything to use as leverage. Lawyers representing the family sent veiled threats through official channels, warning me to back down or face the consequences. But this time, I was ready. Every threat was met with careful documentation. Every attempt at silencing us was exposed in court filings. I kept detailed records of every call, every message, every interaction. With each piece of evidence, the cracks in the Aldriches' perfect facade grew wider. The truth began seeping out, unstoppable and undeniable. The day the trial began was heavy with tension. Lyra, still fragile but resolute, appeared beside me in court. It was the first time I'd seen her in months, and though her composure was hard-won, there was a quiet strength in her eyes. A flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman hidden behind years of pain and silence. Her family sat across the room. Celeste's mask of polite detachment slipped here and there, revealing flashes of anger and fear. Callan's jaw was tight, eyes cold and calculating. Garrett's stoic facade was the only thing holding a torrent of rage and denial at bay. As the trial unfolded, witnesses stepped forward one by one. Friends who remembered the girl Lyra was before the Aldridge grip tightened. Former employees who spoke of the family's controlling nature. Distant relatives who had tried to challenge the family's narrative and were swiftly shut down. Each testimony peeled back another layer of the Aldridge's web of control. Then came the moment no one in that courtroom would forget. Lyra stood and read aloud from her journal. Her voice, though steady, carried the weight of years of silenced pain. She told the story of a childhood stolen, of dreams crushed beneath expectations, of a summer when she tried to speak out, only to be met with cold threats and isolation. For the first time in her life, her story was heard on its own terms, not as gossip, not as scandal, but as truth. The judge listened carefully, allowing the pain and courage to resonate beyond the walls of the courtroom. In the end, the court ruled decisively. The Aldridges were ordered to cease all contact with Lyra immediately. Financial controls that had strangled her independence were lifted. Protective orders were put in place to ensure she could rebuild her life without fear of interference. Callan faced separate legal consequences for his attempts to intimidate witnesses, consequences that left no doubt the court would not tolerate such behavior. Celeste and Garrett's reputations were shattered beneath the weight of public scrutiny. The carefully maintained image they had spent decades crafting was reduced to dust. As for Lyra and me, the road ahead was long but filled with hope. We took things slowly. Therapy sessions helped unpack the years of trauma. Counseling gave us tools to rebuild trust, not just in each other, but in ourselves. Lyra returned home, but this time on her own terms. She wasn't the quiet, broken woman I'd found months ago. She was strong, resilient, determined never to be silenced again. The Aldridges never apologized. Not once. They never acknowledged the damage they caused. They remain outcasts in our lives, a constant reminder of what we escaped. I don't forgive them. I don't think I ever will. Because what they did was not a mistake. It was deliberate, cold, cruel. But I am no longer afraid. Lyra is healing. We're healing. And for the first time in a very long time, we're free.